I discovered hidden aliens in Africa that left me terrified, and ever since that day, I cannot shake the feeling that my entire understanding of history was built on lies. A few years ago, when I stumbled onto those expedition notes about a lost Congolese research team from the late 1970s, I assumed I would find nothing more than a misguided quest for ancient artifacts. The mainstream narrative was simple. A small group of explorers vanished, probably victims of malaria, poachers, or the unforgiving jungle itself. But something never sat right with me about the official reports. They felt too neat, too rehearsed, as if some clever force was using the art of persuasion to ensure we all accepted the easy explanation. I know it sounds absurd, but the deeper I dug, the more I found contradictory statements hidden in declassified documents and personal diaries scattered through dusty archives that were rarely opened, as if someone or something wanted to keep us in the dark. Every time I tried to piece together the truth, I felt as if I was stepping into forbidden territory, like I was daring to infringe on a kind of intellectual property secretly copyrighted by those who manipulate human psychology for their own ends. In the quiet corner of a library where I conducted my research, I read an eyewitness account from one of the few survivors of a mid-century survey team who insisted that what they found in those remote villages defied reason. He claimed they were not just dealing with a strange tribe or elusive animals, but with beings that looked almost human, yet not quite. I remember my heart pounding as I examined these old texts, realizing that the small carvings and symbols described matched no known African culture. Instead, these images resembled creatures with elongated skulls, disproportionately large eyes, and limbs that seemed unnaturally flexible. Was the man lying, or was he silenced before he could reveal more? He died under suspicious circumstances, and to this day, I wonder if anyone else dared question the official story. I flew to the Congo last year with a simple goal: to find physical traces of whatever it was they encountered. My friends thought I was crazy, but I believed that if I could confirm even one odd detail, just one carving, one relic, I would win quick rewards in the form of irrefutable proof. I imagined a news story that would challenge everything we hold as conventional truth. When I arrived, I could feel the thickness in the air. The humidity clung to my skin, and the constant buzz of insects felt oddly subdued. Locals who agreed to guide me would only go so far, refusing to approach certain areas they claimed were cursed. At first, I scoffed at their strong belief in old legends, but it was hard to ignore the fear behind their eyes. They said there were lights, strange lights that flickered deep in the canopy at night, and that anyone foolish enough to follow them would never return. On my second evening, I set up camp in a clearing just beyond the area locals warned me about. From here, I could just make out what appeared to be abandoned structures poking through the dense vegetation. They did not look like any tribal huts. Their geometry seemed too precise, their materials strangely resistant to age and decay. As I lay there in the darkness, I thought I heard a distant hum. It was like a machine vibrating in the far reaches of my hearing, too faint to pinpoint. My instincts told me to stay put, to leave at dawn, but my curiosity had taken hold. Why had official sources never mentioned such ruins? Why pretend these places did not exist? Was this some kind of covert agreement? A secret arrangement to keep the world ignorant? I drifted in and out of uneasy sleep until a sudden silence jolted me awake. No insects, no distant animal calls, just silence. It was a silence so absolute that my ears rang with the absence of sound. Something was off. I rose slowly and peered into the darkness. My flashlight flickered, which made my heart skip a beat, and I realized how alone I truly was. Somewhere out there, I suspected, were the answers I craved, but at what cost? I had risked everything to stand here in this hidden place, chasing after something that might rewrite the story of our species. But as I stepped forward, carefully lifting fronds of oversized leaves, I wondered, Was my determination to find these secrets only fueling my undoing? Perhaps that is the real human psychology at play. Show them a mystery and watch them come running, unable to resist the lure of forbidden knowledge. In the morning, I pushed deeper into the undergrowth, heart pounding with each step. Eventually, I reached a clearing where moss-covered stones rose in a pattern that hinted at an ancient complex. As I scraped away the vines, I uncovered carvings that matched the descriptions I had read about. Tall beings with elongated heads, eyes staring blankly, and arms reaching skyward. I felt both triumph and dread. This was my proof, but something about it was profoundly unsettling. I touched the carvings, half expecting to feel a surge of energy. They were cool to the touch, silent witnesses to a controversy the world refused to acknowledge. Suddenly, a faint light shimmered far ahead, beyond the broken archway of a ruined entrance. My mind raced with questions, each one louder than the last. Was I the first outsider to see this in decades, or had others been here recently, quietly cataloging these secrets and ensuring they never reached the public? I reached for my camera and hesitated, hand trembling. Capturing an image might give me the leverage I needed to persuade anyone back home that I was not losing my mind. But what if I was exposing myself to forces that would stop at nothing to keep this quiet? The official histories, the hushed whispers, the contradictory evidence, it all formed a twisted narrative designed to shape what we believe. I had entered a world that felt like a copyright-protected secret hidden in plain sight, and now that I was here, I realized I might not leave as the same man who arrived. I should have asked myself sooner, why did I believe I could handle this truth? Why did I think that finding these elusive beings would give me some kind of quick reward, when all it has given me so far is fear and confusion? As the day slipped toward dusk, my pulse quickened. I heard movement behind me, a soft scraping sound as if something was shifting through the brush, watching me, waiting. I tightened my grip on my pack and glanced back at the ruins. I knew that whatever I was dealing with, it was far more than lost history. I wanted to run, but something kept my feet planted. Perhaps I had to know if these creatures were real, if they were the missing link behind all those vanished expeditions and hushed rumors. I took a step forward, and that was when I saw it. Just a glimpse, a small silhouette darting behind a twisted trunk. Suddenly, every doubt and fear coalesced into a single, horrifying certainty. I was not alone. I stood there, heart pounding, as two of my guides finally mustered the courage to join me at the edge of that ruined clearing. They had heard my frantic whispers the night before, had seen the panic in my eyes, and reluctantly followed me through the twisting vines at dawn. When we stepped through the last thicket, we found even more carvings than I had discovered alone. They were scattered across moss-covered stones, meticulously etched into surfaces that seemed far older than anyone dared to guess. I remember one guide, Elias, trembling as he traced a finger along a line of engraved figures. They stood upright, with unnaturally long skulls and enormous, hollow eyes that stared out into eternity. Another guide, Jacob, immediately insisted that these markings must be some elaborate joke by a rival tribe. He said they looked too alien, too perfect, too unnatural. How could anyone in these dense forests have created such unsettling precision? I did not know what to believe. I had read accounts of supposed hoaxes staged by local shamans to scare off intruders, but this felt different. There was a sense of careful craftsmanship and intent, each angle precise and deliberate. Yet the forms depicted did not match any human proportions I knew. The feet seemed elongated, the shoulders too narrow, and the heads were stretched as if designed to house a brain unlike ours. From the corner of my eye, I saw Elias step back, covering his mouth as though he were about to be sick. He whispered that whatever made these carvings could not have been human, not in any sense we understand. Jacob spat on the ground, refusing to accept such nonsense. He accused Elias and me of being too gullible, pointing out that hungry explorers will believe anything when they feel cornered by fear. I tried to remain calm, but my voice came out shaky. I told them about the odd silence last night, the flicker of lights I had glimpsed beyond the trees. Both men tensed at that. Strange lights were a taboo subject here. Some villagers had whispered of them, but no one ever dared describe them in detail. As if on cue, just as I mentioned those lights, a dull glow appeared deeper in the jungle. It was faint but unmistakable, a pale flicker weaving in and out of the foliage, as though something was signaling to us. Elias cursed under his breath, while Jacob grew strangely quiet, staring intently at that distant source. For a moment I felt a surge of excitement. Had we found what we came for? Was this the main reveal? The proof that would finally justify all the risks? My camera shook in my hands as I tried to steady the lens. Before I could snap a photo, the glow vanished. It was just gone, as if it had never been there. We waited, holding our breaths, but the silence returned, that heavy emptiness pressing down on us. Elias murmured that we should leave immediately. He believed these carvings, these lights, were lures set by entities who wished to remain hidden. Jacob insisted there must be a rational explanation, maybe some bioluminescent fungus or nocturnal bird we had startled. I caught myself wondering if the truth could be that simple. I asked myself, were we truly dealing with something otherworldly, or had my mind become tangled in old tales and desperate hopes? In that uneasy stalemate, we decided to examine the carvings more closely. Kneeling by a stone slab, I noticed tiny marks I had not seen before. They looked like symbols arranged in a pattern, shapes that resembled elongated spines or branching vines. Each symbol repeated at intervals, forming what might have been a sequence or code. Elias swore he felt a faint vibration when he placed his ear close to the rock, as if a current of energy pulsed through it. Jacob tried to dismiss this as nerves, but he failed to hide the uncertainty in his own eyes. As we argued and tried to interpret what we were seeing, the forest gloom seemed to deepen. Our voices felt muffled, as if something were absorbing the sound. I heard a rustle overhead and looked up, seeing nothing but twisted branches. Yet I could not shake the feeling that we were being observed. Each time I turned around, I caught a flicker of movement at the edges of my vision, shadows darting behind trunks, shapes that never fully formed. I asked myself, could these alien beings described in the old texts still be here, watching us from just beyond the clearing? I reached out and pressed my hand against one of the carved faces, running my fingers along its elongated cranium. It felt cool and slightly damp. In that instant, I heard a distant cry, a sound that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. It was not an animal call I recognized. Elias gripped my arm so hard it hurt. Jacob looked around wildly, one hand reaching for the machete at his belt. We waited for the cry to repeat, but it did not. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then the ground beneath us trembled. It was a subtle tremor, so faint that I wondered if I imagined it, but the others felt it too. A thin crack appeared in one of the old stones, as if something were shifting deep below. Without warning, a flurry of what looked like tiny white feathers drifted down from the canopy above, though there were no birds in sight. The feathers were delicate and unnatural, almost translucent. They caught the dim light and shimmered oddly before dissolving into nothing when we tried to catch them. This, more than anything, rattled Jacob. He stared at his empty hands, trying to comprehend why solid matter would vanish like smoke. In the distance, the pale glow returned, stronger this time, bobbing unnaturally through the dense vegetation. It seemed to be coming closer. Elias pulled at my sleeve, urging that we run while we still could. Jacob hesitated, torn between his denial and the escalating evidence that nothing here followed the rules he knew. My chest tightened as I realized we had no clear path forward. Retreat offered safety, but we might lose our only chance to uncover the truth. Pressing on meant risking that whatever lurked out there would show itself in ways that could destroy our sanity. I wondered if I had led these men into a nightmare that would never let us go. Before I could decide, something moved in the shadows just a few yards away. We heard branches snap, too deliberate to be an accident. Elias pointed a shaking finger at a pale shape crouched low to the ground. The figure rose to full height, revealing a gaunt silhouette that mirrored the carvings. At that exact moment, the lights flickered again, brighter and closer, and the stones at our feet began to hum, vibrating with a hidden energy. We stumbled backward, fear flooding our veins. As we tried to flee, my foot caught on an exposed root. I fell, hard, my camera slipping from my grip and landing with a crack. When I looked up, the pale shape had vanished. The lights were gone. The silence bore down on us like a suffocating shroud. We realized then that the carvings were not just relics, they were warnings. Whatever stood in the darkness was no tribal legend or harmless illusion. As we regrouped, shaken and disoriented, I saw something glint among the broken camera parts. It was a small shard of carved stone chipped free from the ruins, revealing intricate layers beneath the surface. This discovery brought no relief. Instead, it only made me certain that everything we thought we understood was about to be shattered beyond repair. In the hours after we fled the clearing, every step felt heavier than the last. The forest around us had grown silent in a way that made my ears ache, as if something in the air had swallowed all sound. No birds called out, no insects buzzed, not even a distant rustle of leaves betrayed any normal life. Elias muttered that we were not alone, that whatever we had stumbled upon was making itself known by enforcing this unnatural hush. Jacob insisted we press on, swatting at the vines, his jaw clenched in defiance. He seemed convinced that our only chance lay in pushing forward, deeper into unknown territory, rather than retreating back the way we came. I was torn, tempted to turn and run until my legs gave out, but held in place by the nagging thought that if we fled now, we might never understand what we had glimpsed. As we approached our makeshift camp, we found strange footprints in the soft earth surrounding our tent. They were small, about the length of a child's foot, but elongated, with toes that seemed too tapered and widely spaced. Elias knelt to examine them, his face drawn tight with fear. He said it looked as if something had circled the camp while we were gone, inspecting our gear and leaving its mark. Jacob tried to brush it off, claiming it could be an odd species of ape or a malformed animal, but even he sounded unconvincing. I felt that twist of dread in my gut, the growing certainty that we had trespassed on territory never meant for human discovery. The tension between us escalated under this quiet canopy. Elias demanded we turn back, his voice shaking as he called us fools for continuing. Jacob fired back, accusing Elias of cowardice, reminding him of what we stood to gain if we found hard proof. Fame, influence, maybe even a profound place in the history books. I found myself caught in their argument, unsure whether to trust reason or instinct. The old notes I had studied before coming here nagged at me, their contradictory accounts and cryptic hints suggesting that something had always been hidden here, something both real and impossible to classify. That night, as darkness settled over the camp, I took out the old expedition papers I had brought with me. By the light of a dim flashlight, I reread fragments of handwritten testimony from explorers long dead. One claimed to have seen creatures lurking near these ruins, small bald figures that moved with a silent grace. Another insisted that entire sections of jungle had shifted overnight, as if rearranged by invisible hands. The more I read, the less I understood. Were these stories exaggerated, or had someone systematically altered official records to confuse anyone curious enough to follow this trail? Just before midnight, Elias jolted awake, shouting that something had peered at him through the leaves. When we rushed over to where he pointed, we saw nothing but gently swaying fronds. Yet I knew he believed what he had seen. Two pale, elongated heads with unblinking eyes, watching us with terrible calm. We swept the area with our flashlights and found nothing, not even footprints this time. It was as if they wanted us to know they were near, but not let us confirm their existence. The paranoia among us grew thicker, and I realized we were clinging to the hope that one of us was simply imagining things. The next morning my throat felt sore from the stale, humid air. We continued forward, forging a path through tangled greenery. Every so often we stumbled upon oddities, stones stacked in patterns that made no sense, half-buried fragments of carved faces, patches of ground where leaves were neatly arranged in spirals. None of it felt random. It was as though someone or something was guiding us along a path we did not understand. At one point, Elias and Jacob both froze, staring at a low mound of earth ahead. I saw it too. A dark shape crouched behind a cluster of ferns. When we approached, it vanished, leaving behind only a faint glow that lingered in the air, like an afterimage burned into our retinas. Elias cried out that we were being toyed with, tricked into following illusions deeper into the forest. Jacob, his voice wavering, insisted we go on just a bit further. He clung to the belief that we were on the edge of a great revelation. I asked myself if we had lost our minds, arguing about unknown beings in a place that defied everything we knew. Eventually, we reached a narrow ravine that cut through dense undergrowth. It was lined with smooth stones carved into geometric shapes, some resembling strange, elongated skulls. Water dripped from the mossy edges, creating a rhythmic tap that seemed too measured, too intentional. As we slid down into the ravine's hollow depths, I noticed a faint light flickering far ahead, just beyond a bend in the rock. We crept closer, hearts hammering, half expecting to find some hidden chamber or ancient shrine. Instead, we came upon a small clearing where something had been left for us, a piece of cloth torn from a modern backpack and scratched into the dirt beside it, a pattern that matched the symbols we saw in the ruins. This felt like a terrible turning point, a false moment of resolution. We had found tangible proof that others had passed this way. Perhaps they had discovered something miraculous and vanished. For a second, we dared hope that we might piece together their fate. But as soon as we touched the fabric, the ground shook again, harder than before. Loose stones tumbled down the ravine slopes, and the flickering light we had seen darted out of sight. I could hear Elias screaming over the noise, insisting that something wanted us trapped here. Jacob snarled that we had to push forward, that turning back now would only ensure we remained stuck in this half-known nightmare. I stood paralyzed, my mind reeling from the conflicting theories swirling around us. Then, without warning, the ravine's walls began to tremble. A low moan rose from beneath our feet, and cracks slithered across the surface of the carved stones. As we scrambled to find a foothold, something rushed through the foliage above us. A dark shape, swift and silent, its eyes reflecting a pale, ghostly shine. Elias yelled that it was coming for us, and Jacob swung his machete blindly into the air, desperate to ward it off. Just as I thought we might scramble free, a cluster of broad leaves parted, revealing 3 small figures perched above. Their heads were smooth and reflective, their limbs impossibly slender. They made no sound, yet their presence felt deafening. My heart seized. They dropped into the ravine, blocking our escape, moving closer with a grace both alien and predatory. We had nowhere to run. We stood in that dim space, trapped between the trembling earth and these impossible beings, struggling to comprehend what we faced. We stood in that ravine, hearts pounding, as the 3 small figures closed in. Their movements were deliberate and soundless. Each step they took seemed to distort the air around them, as if the light itself bent to their will. Elias whimpered, clutching a broken branch as if it could protect him. Jacob grimaced, sweat dripping into his eyes, raising the machete that now felt like a toy against beings that defied all reason. I felt cold despite the humid air, my legs weak, my mind scrambling for any explanation that might make sense of what we were seeing. They surrounded us, pausing just out of arm's reach, their dark eyes reflecting a faint glow. Something in that gaze felt ancient, like the weight of countless generations pressed into a single stare. I opened my mouth, wanting to shout or plead, but no words came. One of the figures lifted a slender arm, its long fingers splayed. A moment later, faint patterns of colored light flickered across the ravine's stony walls. They reminded me of the carvings we had seen earlier, but now these symbols floated like shimmering ghosts, shapes within shapes that twisted my thoughts into knots. It was a language, I realized, though not a spoken one, a communication of pure information, transmitted directly into our senses. My head throbbed as meaning emerged, half-formed and terrifying. Elias stumbled backward, pressing both palms against his temples. He grunted as if in pain. Jacob made a low groan, nearly dropping his machete, and I steadied him by the shoulder. We all saw it, or sensed it, that message they were conveying. It showed us images of human faces shifting and changing through time, as though evolving under unseen guidance. It hinted at an ancient contract, a silent agreement we never knew we signed. These beings had been here long before our ancestors learned to walk upright. They had watched us, nudging our growth, gently molding our fate. Now, for reasons we could not decipher, they were revealing themselves, pulling back the curtain for a fleeting moment, perhaps curious to see what we would do. I shook my head, trying to reject what I was experiencing. How could this be true? Had we misunderstood everything we knew about our species? The thought of our history being shaped by hidden hands made my chest tighten. Elias shouted something incoherent, half plea and half protest. Jacob snarled, eyes wild, as if challenging these beings to show him proof that what he saw was not a cruel trick. Then, another wave of lights flickered, revealing darker truths. We glimpsed secret experiments, modern men in sealed suits studying fragments of unknown technology. I caught a glimpse of a familiar emblem, A, government insignia half eroded by time. I remembered reading rumors of covert operations conducted deep in the jungle decades ago. Were these humans working with the creatures, or trying to steal from them? The lights swirled faster, the images growing dizzying. They showed us something more horrifying than I could bear. Our presence here was no accident. We had stumbled into a vast system of observation and manipulation. The vanishings, the strange ruins, the silences in the jungle, they were all part of a scheme that blended ancient influence with modern secrecy. Elias screamed again, as if that sound could shatter the nightmare. Jacob dropped to one knee, breathing hard, his bravado drained away. I felt my sanity fray at the edges, yet I could not look away. We had become pawns in a game that spanned millennia, and these beings were now revealing the rules, taunting us with our ignorance. A sudden burst of shrill cries echoed through the ravine. It came not from the creatures, but from the trees above, as if other watchers had gathered to witness this moment of revelation. The ground trembled again, and I realized the earth was shifting beneath our feet. Stones cracked, sending shards tumbling down the slope. We had to move or be buried alive. I tugged Elias's arm, shouting that we must climb out, but he stared at me with hollow eyes. Jacob tried to stand, legs shaking, muttering that we had to escape, that we could not die here. Our lives became a desperate scramble to scale the slippery rocks, the presence of those beings looming behind us. As we climbed, the creatures did not stop us. Instead, they watched, their heads tilting slightly, their message delivered. They had shown us that human history was not what we believed, that our place in the world was not secure. If we survived, we would carry this burden of knowledge. That thought terrified me more than anything. The implication was that none of us truly understood our origins. We had always assumed we were alone in shaping our destiny. Now that illusion was shattered, we reached a narrow ledge and paused, gasping for air. I risked a glance back. The figures had vanished, their glowing symbols fading into darkness, yet their presence lingered, etched in my mind. I could still see the pattern of lights dancing behind my eyelids, still feel the weight of those revelations pressing on my chest. Elias whimpered, repeating that we must not tell anyone, that no one would believe us anyway. Jacob shook his head, half laughing at the madness of it all. He gripped my arm, asking how we could carry on knowing what we now knew. I did not have an answer. It seemed as though we were meant to escape, to spread this story, or perhaps to be dismissed as lunatics, ensuring that the secret would remain safe. Yet something nagged at me. We had witnessed only fragments. The creatures had shown us images of influence and hidden collaboration, but not their ultimate purpose. Were they guiding us, protecting us, or merely using us as part of a grand experiment? The sound of distant thunder rumbled through the jungle. I felt the urge to run until my lungs burned, to leave this cursed place and never return. Yet the questions buzzed in my skull. If those beings had shaped us, what else were they shaping now? Had human civilization been steered towards some unfathomable goal? And if we ever dared reveal what we saw, would anyone listen? Or would we become another footnote in the long secret history that these entities had helped write? We pressed onward, half stumbling, not knowing if we were heading back to our world or deeper into theirs. The night closed in around us, and as we crested a ridge, I swear I saw a distant glow flicker across the sky. For a heartbeat, it looked like a silent craft drifting above the treetops, watching us just as the creatures had. I could not be sure. My eyes were tired and my mind clouded, but the possibility lingered, whispering that we had only scratched the surface of a truth far more dangerous than we could comprehend. By the time we stumbled into a clearing that offered a glimpse of distant hills, dawn was creeping over the treetops. Elias and Jacob followed behind me, pale and silent, no longer arguing about what we had seen. Our clothes were torn, our bodies scratched by thorns, and the taste of panic still lingered on our tongues. Each step felt heavier, weighed down by the impossible truth we now carried. I tried to recall the early texts I had read before coming here, how they hinted at vanished expeditions and sealed records. In that moment, it all began to click together, forming a terrible tapestry of meaning I had been too blind to see until now. We found a narrow stream where we washed our faces. The cold water shocked me awake, reminding me we were still alive and free to make sense of what we had learned. As I looked around, I noticed something I had overlooked on our first approach. The very patterns etched into ancient stones also seemed reflected in the swirl of vines, the arch of branches above, and even the subtle arrangement of the forest floor. The place was shaped, guided like a clay sculpture, and those invisible hands that pressed and molded it had pressed and molded us as well. Elias crouched beside me, shaking his head as if trying to rattle loose the memories of glowing symbols and silent watchers. Jacob sat with his back against a tree, eyes distant, mumbling that our history books were worthless now. He had come here craving a quick reward, proof that would make him famous, but he had found only doubt and terror. None of us spoke of going back deeper into the jungle. We knew we had seen enough. As we ventured toward what we hoped would be the outskirts of this domain, my mind pieced together the contradictions. The old expedition reports that never matched, the missing researchers whose notes vanished in locked archives, the strange patterns repeated in tribal legends and suppressed by official statements. The signs were always there, but we had never known how to read them. These beings had existed long before the first human-scratched images into cave walls. They had lived alongside us, not as visitors, but as something else. Observers, orchestrators, perhaps even caretakers with their own agenda. They allowed us to grow, to think we were in charge, while quietly steering our path. Now that I understood this, my pulse hammered with a new kind of fear. If these creatures could remain hidden for so long, shaping the destiny of our species, what else had they influenced? Technology, religion, wars, and peace treaties. Had they nudged events in ways we could not fathom? Had we stumbled upon not just a secret in this African jungle, but the key to unraveling the entire narrative of humanity? The implications thundered in my mind. If I told this story to anyone, would they believe it? Would they laugh? Or would someone step in to silence me before I could spread the truth? Elias finally broke the silence, whispering that we should never come back here, that knowledge like this could destroy a person's sanity. Jacob stared at him, then looked at me and said we had a responsibility now. We knew something no one else did. Was it better to keep quiet, to let the world continue in blissful ignorance, or to share it, risking chaos and disbelief? We trudged on, the sunlight growing brighter, the jungle gradually giving way to more familiar landscapes. Before we left that strange territory behind, I turned for one last look. The branches formed a pattern that made my stomach twist. Even as we escaped, I saw faint hints of those alien carvings echoed in the forest bones. We were leaving, but I sensed that the forest watched us go, indifferent yet mindful, as if aware we were carrying its secret into the larger world. When we finally emerged onto a remote dirt path, we stumbled across signs of recent human presence, a few scraps of cloth, a torn map fragment that bore markings suspiciously similar to the ones we had seen in the ravine. It confirmed our darkest suspicions. We were not the first to discover this, and others had tried to hide their findings. Had governments known about these creatures all along, suppressing the truth to maintain order? It raised a chilling thought. Our ignorance might not have been accidental. Perhaps it was carefully maintained. As we rested, I realized the future stretched out before us, full of questions we could never fully answer. The beings we encountered were no myth. They were a living reality that challenged our understanding of evolution, human history, and the stories we tell ourselves. We had glimpsed the puppet masters behind a curtain too vast for any of us to comprehend. Yet what we had seen here was likely only a fragment of a larger design. If these creatures chose to reveal themselves at all, it must serve a purpose beyond our grasp. I looked to Elias and Jacob, both broken in their own ways. I wondered how they would live with this knowledge. Would Elias return home, pretend it was all a dream, and shut himself away? Would Jacob try to broadcast the truth, only to be discredited or worse? And what about me? I had come seeking proof, and now I possessed something far more potent, a secret that could upend everything we believe about who we are. As we moved on, the silence around us changed subtly. Birds chirped in the distance, insects hummed in the underbrush, and the world seemed normal again. Yet it felt like a fragile veneer. I thought back to the first strange hint in those expedition papers, the carvings we found, the silent watchers, the flickering lights. Each step of our journey led us deeper into a reality we never knew existed. What does it mean that creatures older than our civilization have guided our steps from the shadows? If humanity is not the sole author of its fate, how can we trust the narratives we cherish? Perhaps the real horror lies not in the existence of these beings, but in the thought that we have lived under their gentle guidance since the dawn of time. We are the children who never realized someone else was holding our hand. As we finally reached a rough road that might lead us back to distant villages, I asked myself the only question that mattered now. If this secret was hidden here so carefully and for so long, what else lies buried in places we dare not look? Hello, agents. Curious about the most famous and shocking UFO cases? My new ebook uncovers 51 encounters the government tried to hide. Find it in the pinned comment. And if you enjoyed these stories, make sure to subscribe, and there's another one waiting for you right here.